The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important waterways on the planet. At first glance, it looks like just another narrow stretch of sea between Iran and Oman. But in reality, this small passage carries nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply every single day. That means a significant portion of the global economy depends on what happens in this narrow corridor of water. Every day, massive oil tankers leave the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, transporting crude oil and liquefied natural gas to markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Countries like China, India, Japan, and South Korea rely heavily on this route for their energy needs. If traffic through the strait is disrupted, even briefly, oil prices can surge within hours. Financial markets react immediately. Energy-importing nations feel the pressure almost overnight. Now imagine a scenario in which the United States decides to impose a naval blockade targeting Iranian shipping operations in this region. What would that actually mean? And how would such a move affect global stability? A naval blockade is not simply a matter of placing ships in the water. It is a coordinated military strategy designed to control maritime movement. In the case of the Strait of Hormuz, the United States would likely deploy aircraft carrier strike groups, guided missile destroyers, submarines, surveillance aircraft, and reconnaissance satellites. The objective would be to monitor, inspect, and potentially restrict vessels suspected of carrying Iranian exports. Modern naval blockades rely heavily on intelligence. Satellites track ship movements in real time. Drones patrol overhead. Radar systems monitor even small boats moving along the coastline. Communication networks intercept signals. In today's world, maritime control is not just about physical presence, but about information dominance. However, the Strait of Hormuz presents unique challenges. At its narrowest navigable point, the shipping lanes are only a few miles wide in each direction. This creates a highly compressed environment where civilian oil tankers, cargo ships, and military vessels operate in close proximity. Any miscalculation could escalate rapidly. Iran does not possess a navy comparable in size to that of the United States. Instead, it has developed asymmetric capabilities specifically designed for this environment. Fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles positioned along the coastline, naval mines, and drone technology form the backbone of Iran's maritime defense strategy. Rather than competing ship for ship, Iran focuses on creating uncertainty and raising the cost of confrontation. Naval mines are one of the most serious threats in such a confined waterway. Even a limited deployment could slow or halt commercial traffic until the area is cleared. Mine countermeasure operations are complex and time-consuming. During that period, global energy markets would experience significant volatility. Another factor is geography. Iran controls much of the northern coastline of the strait and several nearby islands. This geographic proximity provides strategic leverage. Coastal missile batteries positioned on elevated terrain could potentially target vessels transiting the channel. While advanced naval defense systems exist to intercept such threats, the risk of escalation would remain high. Beyond the military dimension lies the economic reality. Roughly 20% of globally traded petroleum passes through this choke point. Although alternative pipelines exist in the region, their capacity is limited. They cannot fully replace the volume that moves daily through Hormuz. This means any sustained disruption would create a supply shock. Higher oil prices affect transportation, manufacturing, electricity generation, and food production. Inflationary pressure spreads quickly. Developing economies often suffer the most, as energy costs consume a larger share of national income. In a globally interconnected system, even distant countries feel the consequences of instability in this narrow passage. There is also the political dimension. A blockade would not occur in isolation. Regional actors such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf states would closely monitor developments. Major global powers, including China and Russia, would assess how their interests are affected. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a regional issue. It is a global strategic artery. Supporters of strong maritime enforcement argue that controlling key choke points demonstrates power and deters adversaries. Critics warn that blockades are historically viewed as acts of war under international law. The legal interpretation would depend on the circumstances, the mandate, and the reactions of other states. Regardless of terminology, the tension generated by such a move would be significant. One important question is whether the objective would be full closure or selective enforcement. Completely shutting down the strait would damage not only Iran, but also global markets and U.S. allies. A more likely scenario would involve targeted inspections and restrictions aimed at specific vessels. Even so, the perception of risk alone can influence shipping insurance rates and commercial decisions. Insurance premiums for tankers traveling through high-risk zones can increase dramatically during periods of tension. Higher insurance costs translate into higher transportation expenses, which ultimately feed into consumer prices. Sometimes the economic impact of uncertainty can be nearly as powerful as actual disruption. Historically, the Strait of Hormuz has experienced periods of confrontation, including the so-called tanker war during the 1980s. Those events demonstrated how quickly maritime incidents can escalate. They also showed the resilience of global trade systems, but at considerable financial and human cost. Today's geopolitical environment is even more complex. Energy markets are more interconnected, financial systems are faster, and information spreads instantly through digital networks. A single incident in the strait could trigger immediate global headlines and market reactions within minutes. In assessing who holds the advantage, analysts often conclude that the United States maintains overwhelming superiority in conventional naval power. Aircraft carriers project air dominance. Advanced missile defense systems protect major vessels. Submarines operate with stealth capabilities. However, dominance in open ocean warfare does not eliminate the risks inherent in narrow, congested waterways. Iran's strategy is not necessarily to defeat a superior navy outright, but to raise the cost of confrontation high enough to deter escalation. By leveraging geography, speed, and asymmetric tools, it seeks to complicate any attempt at complete maritime control. Ultimately, the Strait of Hormuz represents more than a shipping lane. It is leverage in geopolitical negotiations. It is a symbol of energy dependence. It is a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology, certain physical locations retain enormous strategic value. If a blockade were implemented, the immediate consequences would be heightened military alertness, market volatility, and intense diplomatic activity. The long-term outcome would depend on restraint, negotiation, and the calculations of all parties involved. The world's energy lifeline runs through a corridor only a few miles wide. In that narrow space, global economics, military power, and political strategy intersect. Understanding the Strait of Hormuz means understanding how geography can shape international relations and how a single choke point can influence the stability of the entire global system. In the end, the question is not only whether a blockade could happen, but what it would signal about the balance of power in one of the most sensitive regions on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz remains a focal point where strategy, energy, and global security converge, and its importance is unlikely to diminish anytime soon.